Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're really digging into the latest from the Richard Allen trial in Delphi.
Yeah, there's been a lot happening.
We've got trial testimony transcripts, some online discussion, really trying to piece together these new developments.
Exactly. Our mission here is to kind of synthesize all this, focusing on the big things, the DNA, the blood spatter analysis, and that bridge guy video the defense put out.
And then maybe fit it all into you know, the bigger picture, the timeline of the case.
Right. It's complex.
Okay, let's start with the DNA. That's often huge in these cases. The WTHR transcript from the trial covered the testimony of Stacy Bozanovsky, the state's analyst. What were the headlines there?
Well, the biggest headline really is what wasn't found. Bozanovsky testified Richard Allen's DNA was not at the crime
And
scene.
not on the gross clothing. Fingernails.
Nope. Nothing on the clothes, fingernail scrapings, none in the blood samples tested, and not even on that unfired bullet cartridge.
The one they linked to his gun.
Wow. Exactly. The one the prosecution is really leaned on.
And it goes further, right? They didn't find the girl's DNA at his place either.
Correct. Nothing belonging to Abby or Libby found in his home, on his jacket, boots, knives, carpet samples they took. Zero connection found there.
And no DNA evidence pointing to sexual assault.
No, the analysis didn't support that.
So did they find any male DNA?
They did find some male DNA, yes. But Bozanovsky explained it was either consistent with just background environmental or maybe even contamination from someone at the crime lab.
But crucially, not Allen.
Not Allen, that was clear.
Okay, so the defense must have jumped on this during cross-examination. What about the hair evidence? I remember that being mentioned.
Oh, yeah. They push hard on that. Question why more hairs weren't tested, why they weren't sent out to other labs,
And her response?
She basically said, look, the investigators made the call on how much testing to do. It wasn't her decision.
Putting it back on the investigation.
Pretty much. And she also confirmed they were really only looking for male DNA from the start based on the assumption the killer was male.
Interesting. It seems like the jury was really locked in on this part. The transcript mentioned questions about reagents and chimeras.
Yeah, that was fascinating. Jurors asking about the chemicals used in testing, the reagents, and chimeras. That's like when someone has two sets of DNA.
Which suggests they're really thinking critically about the science.
Absolutely. They're considering potential flaws, contamination, complex scenarios, not just taking it at face value.
Katie Jackson, Lindsay, the legal analyst in the WTHR piece, called the lack of Allen's DNA a win for the defense. But she had a counterpoint, too.
Right. She said, well, the prosecution could argue the killer was careful, maybe wore gloves, tried not to leave DNA.
Okay, if that makes sense.
But Lindsay also stressed how significant it is that none of the girls' DNA was on Allen's stuff. That's harder to explain away, maybe.
Especially given how violent this scene reportedly was.
Exactly. Though she did mention, degradation over 5 years is possible, or maybe attempts to clean things.
So her takeaway was basically that the jury's likely thinking hard about this lack of DNA link.
Yeah. It's a big hole in the prosecution's narrative, potentially.
Okay, let's shift gears to the blood spatter. Major Pat Cicero's testimony. This sounded quite graphic and detailed.
It was. Cicero, the blood pattern analyst, he painted a picture based on the stains. He called the area a sort of natural bowl or depression.
And he found blood on a tree.
Yeah, a stain on a smaller tree about 4 feet up from the base. That became a point of discussion later.
And his description of the patterns on Libby. That sounded particularly difficult to hear.
It was quite detailed. He noted blood on the bottom of her right foot, suggesting she walked in blood.
Okay.
And a lot of blood in her hands, which he thought meant she likely grabbed at her neck where she was wounded.
Wow.
And he even mentioned moisture on her face, consistent with tears. Really harrowing details.
Did he propose a sequence of events for Libby?
Yes. His interpretation was that she was hurt first, then moved around in the blood, maybe sat down somewhere, which caused more pooling. And then, after she died, he believed she was dragged to the spot near the tree.
Based on what?
Leaves and dirt stuck to her leg and her back. That suggested dragging to him.
Okay. And Abby's situation was different, based on the blood.
Markedly different, yeah. He said there was only a small amount of blood pooling near her arm and shoulder.
And the hands.
No blood on her sleeves or hands, which were found tucked inside Libby's sweatshirt sleeves. That was a key observation.
Very strange.
He also saw blood flow suggesting a neck wound that bled into her mouth. His conclusion was she likely died right where she was found, lying face up, and that her death wasn't immediate.
Did he offer explanations for why Abby's hands were clean?
He acknowledged a few possibilities, said he couldn't rule out that her hands were washed somehow, or maybe she was held down, restrained.
And the defense pointed out he came in very late, right? 7 years later.
Yes, they made sure to highlight that, questioning the reliability of analysis done so long after the fact.
What about that blood on the tree? The defense floated that Odinism idea earlier, suggesting it might have been placed intentionally.
Cicero didn't buy that. His opinion was it was likely transferred accidentally, probably from Libby's hand if she leaned on the tree.
And the legal analyst, Lindsay, what was her take on the blood evidence?
She kind of emphasized the subjective nature of blood spatter. Its interpretation, especially from photos.
Right.
She questioned why no crime scene video was mentioned and pointed out the tree stain could be interpreted two ways, leaning versus placing.
And she questioned the dragging theory, too.
Yeah, asked about the lack of obvious drag marks if Libby was moved, like Cicero suggested. And regarding Abby's hands, she also wondered about restraint.
So her view was DNA. Not good for the state. Blood. Jury's still out.
Pretty much. The impact of the blood evidence is less clear-cut, more open to interpretation than, say, a direct DNA match would be.
Okay, let's talk about Richard Allen's interview in 2022 with Lieutenant Holman. The transcript detailed some interesting, maybe controversial techniques.
Yeah, it provided a real glimpse into interrogation tactics. Holman testified he tried to build rapport first, talking about military service.
Standard technique, maybe?
Then he hit him with the cartridge evidence, showed him it matched his gun, but Allen just kept denying he even had a gun there that day.
And then Holman admitted to, well, lying.
He did. Admitted he told Allen they had video proving he was there and audio of him saying, "down the hill," which apparently they didn't have, or at least not definitively like he claimed.
And Allen's reaction.
Still maintained his innocence. Holman said Allen got agitated, started cursing at one point.
And Holman cursed back.
Yeah, Holman said he mirrored Allen's language, called it an interview technique.
The defense must have had a field day with the admission of lying.
Oh, definitely. They pointed out that in an earlier deposition, Holman had actually denied lying to Allen, so a clear contradiction.
Right. That undermines credibility.
They also covered Allen saying it's over after the search warrant. Allen apparently explained he meant his life was ruined.
And it came out he denied involvement many times before.
Yes, like 25 times early on. But crucially, he never offered any explanation for how that bullet casing got there. Just denied and denied.
Okay, now the bridge guy video. The defense released it.
Yeah.
And it caused a stir online, particularly on Reddit. What were people saying?
A lot of strong reactions. People noted how close the man gets to the girls. You could really feel the tension, the fear.
You could hear whispers.
Yeah, users pointed out the audio, the girls whispering, "Is he behind me? Don't leave me." Libby talking about the path, and the man's voice, "Guys, down the hill."
And Libby says, "Hi."
Yeah, just a quick hi, which some people found really poignant, like she was scared but still being polite.
Was there talk about whether he had a weapon visible?
Speculation, mostly. Some thought he must have, given how quickly the girls seemed scared, maybe hidden, maybe already drawn.
Did the fact Allen still has supporters come up?
Yeah, that was discussed. How even with evidence, some people question guilt, comparing it to other big cases, and lots of debate about why the defense released the video now. Strategy, transparency, sowing doubt.
You mentioned the poignancy of their reactions.
Definitely. Users really focused on the fear in their voices. One mentioned a witness who saw Allen then the girls and felt awful she didn't warn them.
That's heartbreaking.
And the politeness thing, yeah. Saying hi, despite the fear reflecting maybe how girls are taught to act. Some also worried about the families seeing this released publicly.
And someone posted a link to the full video, apparently.
Yeah, it was mentioned in the thread that a link was shared.
Okay, let's use the Reddit timeline to put some dates on this. February 13th, 2017, the day itself. Key moments.
Right. The timeline pegs their arrival around 12:25 p.m. Libby's phone shows photos, a call to her dad asking for a later pickup. Snapchat posts.
And the video recording.
That was timestamped 2:13.51 p.m. Just a minute later, an attempt to unlock her phone with a fingerprint fails.
Then pickup time comes and goes.
Yeah, Libby German arrives at 3:15 p.m. They're not there. Reported missing around 5:30 p.m. Her phone pings one last time late that night. Search called off.
And the next day, Valentine's Day.
The search resumes. And then the awful discovery around 12:45 p.m. bodies found. Press conference confirms it.
The timeline then jumps through the years. Sketches, audio released.
Until October 2022, when Richard Allen is identified and charged.
The probable cause affidavit in November 2022 had some key details, too.
It did. Mentioned Allen admitting being on the bridge around that time, matching the description.
And then came those reported confessions in 2023.
Right, confessions to corrections staff, a psychologist, in April, May 23. That's when the defense's Odinism theory also emerged, challenging the timeline. And then finally, the trial starting October 2024.
The timeline also mentioned Allen confirming his clothing matched descriptions.
Yes, that he told investigators back in October 2022 his clothes that day matched what witnesses saw.
And the search warrant details.
Seizure of his car, knives, phones, clothes, ammo, and crucially, that unfired bullet matching the one at the scene.
And the alleged confessions were quite specific.
Very. The timeline notes details like him stating intent to rape, racking his gun, ordering them down the hill, describing the murders.
But the defense argues the timeline is too tight for one person.
Exactly. They argue one person couldn't have done all that, including staging the scene in the available window.
Amidst all this, the WTHR articles mentioned the local community response. Sounds like they've rallied.
Yeah, big time. Lots of support for law enforcement working the trial, people donating drinks, snacks, just trying to help.
A sense of wanting closure for the town.
Definitely. A hope for healing after all this time. The trial was expected to run quite long, into mid-November.
And finally, that other WTHR piece about his first defense team stepping down. Important context.
Right. Bradley Rodsey and Andrew Baldwin withdrawing earlier on. That caused delays, required new lawyers. Just shows the long, complicated road this case has traveled.
So wrapping this deep dive up, key takeaways are pretty stark. No Allen DNA at the scene.
Right. But then complex blood evidence suggesting, potentially, movement of the bodies. Very different pictures.
Allen's contradictory statements, the controversial interview, and that chilling video.
It really highlights the gaps, the unanswered questions. The lack of DNA is huge. The blood spatter is open to interpretation, creates reasonable doubt. That's what the defense hopes.
And the video. It doesn't show the crime, but it shows that initial moment. The fear is undeniable.
It gives you that first-hand glimpse, however brief and awful. It makes it very real.
It underscores how tough this is. Trying to piece together what happened from these fragments of evidence years later. The jury has an incredibly difficult job.
Immense pressure trying to fit those puzzle pieces together.
So a final thought for you listening. When you consider everything, the DNA void, the blood patterns, the interview tactics, the video, what single piece of evidence stands out to you as either the most compelling or maybe the most contradictory? And why do you think that is? It really makes you think about how evidence is weighed, doesn't it? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.